This war playing out in Minnesota, it's getting scarier and scarier by the day. Because ICE has said goodbye to warrants and they've begun terrorizing children as a matter of routine.
Call your kids now! I will, please! Let's go! Will you hear my kids? Oh God, you guys don't do this to my kids! Come here. My kids! Come on! Oh my God, my kids! My kids are so young! Oh my God! You guys, my kids! Go to the left, go to your mom! Come on! Oh my God! Why? My son is a citizen! We have all the paperwork!
And there's a lot we're gonna have to dive into and break down, but first up is this crazy internal memo kept secret by ICE, but just now leaked by an anonymous whistleblower, right? Because it instructs ICE agents that they can forcibly enter someone's home, your home, even if they don't have a judicial warrant, which is something that not just ICE, but all law enforcement agencies have been explicitly barred from doing for decades because of the Fourth Amendment. And this memo, it's dated May 12th, so presumably ICE has just been following this for months, right? And we're only learning about it now because the agency has kept it under wraps and it took the whistleblower a while to get it out safely. In fact, only supervisors were generally given the memo itself, and they just used it to verbally brief employees. And if an employee was allowed to read the memo, reportedly they had to give it back to the supervisor when they were done. And so now, if this policy is the new normal, the conventional advice given to immigrants about how to protect themselves, it just goes out the window, right? Even as recently as last month, you had Zoran Mamdani telling New Yorkers,
know your rights. If you encounter ICE, these are the things that every New Yorker should know. First, ICE cannot enter into private spaces like your home, school, or a private area of your workplace without a judicial warrant signed by a judge. That looks like this.
But the memo, which was signed by acting ICE Director Todd Lyons, claims that all agents need is an administrative warrant issued by immigration officials themselves, which is why for decades it's held far less authority than a judicial warrant. But the incredible thing is that ICE itself knows this. Its own written training materials from just last year called this practice the chief evil against which the wording of the Fourth Amendment is directed, citing Supreme Court precedent. In fact, the whistleblower says that ICE is telling new hires and agents still in training to ignore those written training materials and just follow the memo's guidance instead. And so all of that may go some way toward explaining why we've seen these videos of agents in tactical gear busting down doors with assault rifles, but no warrant, which is what you saw happening with examples like this guy in Minneapolis recently. But then, even putting the warrant issue aside, the memo itself states that agents must knock on the door and share who they are and why they're at the residence, and then the people inside must be given what's described as a reasonable chance to act lawfully. But from all these videos that we've been seeing pouring out of Minnesota, that is often not happening. And that's also assuming that the person being arrested is even an immigrant at all. You're seeing things like in another case, agents entered a home without a warrant, guns drawn, and they pulled out a 56-year-old US citizen who was only in his underwear out into the freezing cold.
So your grandson watched everything?
Yeah, my grandson watched everything. After they took me, he was crying, looking for me. They just take me out there without any clothes on, unless only the blanket. Only my grandson's blanket.
With DHS then defending itself after the incident, claiming that he was living with two convicted sex offenders and saying that he matched the description of the men that they were actually looking for. Though neither of those people they were talking about were found during the raid, and it was actually later revealed that one of them's in prison already, serving a 4-year sentence, so it's unclear why ICE thought he would be in that home. And so with all these tactics now out in the open, you had a legal expert telling the AP,
if DHS implements this new procedure, what will happen is those arrests will be challenged as an unlawful search and seizure under the Fourth Amendment. And if judges rule that agents were not supposed to enter the home without a warrant, or some other exception to the warrant requirement, such as consent, exigent circumstances, hot pursuit, then that arrest will be dismissed as a constitutional violation.
But then there's also another ICE tactic that's shocking a lot of people right now, and that is what they call the detention, though others call it the abduction and kidnapping of children. Or with just example after example going viral, like this 16-year-old boy and his father in Texas. Or reportedly they were driving to school when two unmarked vehicles pulled them over and masked men with guns but no badges jumped out. Then, without identifying themselves or even stating you're under arrest, they just started pulling on the car doors, and so the pair drove off. Now, the boy here, he was a US citizen, but his father was undocumented, and video obtained by MS Now. You can hear him virtually having a panic attack, fearing that his dad's going to be deported. Then you have the agents chasing after them, repeatedly ramming their car from behind. And eventually they pulled over, the boy was restrained and ended up in the hospital, and his father, well,
I saw like 3 men fully started kicking him down, punching him down.
Get away from my dad, bro. Get away from my dad, bro. Get away from my dad, bro.
And I was not gonna just let that happen, because they're punching him, they're treating him bad. I'm pretty sure everybody would reacted the same way if they saw their dad getting beat down.
But also with this, I gotta know that, 16 is actually relatively old for some of the kids that ICE has been snatching up. Reportedly, agents have detained at least 4 children from the same Minnesota school district in just the past couple of weeks, and one of them was a 5-year-old boy. His name is Liam Ramos, and the school says that just after he and his father got home from his preschool, ICE met them in the driveway. And with that, you had DHS saying that the father fled on foot, and so the agents stayed with the boy for his safety while one chased down the dad. But then, according to the school, the agents had Liam knock on the door of his own home to see if any other people were inside, essentially using a 5-year-old as bait. When Liam's middle school age brother came home 20 minutes later, reportedly he discovered that his younger brother and father had been taken. So now with all that, you have the family's lawyer saying that the pair are being held in San Antonio, even though they've been going through the asylum process perfectly legally. You also have the school district superintendent saying,
"Why detain a 5-year-old? You can't tell me that this child is going to be classified as a violent criminal."
As far as the DHS response, they said they were just targeting the father and claimed that the boy was abandoned. And with that saying, the policy is for a child to either stay with a safe person designated by a parent or be removed along with the detainee. But there, you've got the school saying that another adult living in the home who was outside at the time begged the agents to leave Liam with them, and the agents just refused. And again, that's just one of the 4 I'm talking about, right? We've still got 3 other kids to talk about.
2 weeks ago, a 10-year-old student, 4th grader, was taken by ICE agents on her way to elementary school with her mother.
And with that, you had them adding that the girl called her father and told him that ICE agents were bringing her to school, but by the time that he got there, both his wife and daughter were already gone. And with that, you had school officials saying that they're now in a Texas detention center, just like Liam and his dad, and continuing.
On the way to school, a 17-year-old high school student, a minor, was taken by armed, masked agents. Alone. No parents were present.
And then lastly, you had the school saying that the agents pushed their way into an apartment and detained another 17-year-old student as well as their mother. And so understandably, many of the remaining kids, they're terrified, with as many as a third of the students in the district reportedly staying home in recent weeks out of fear. In fact, you've had the Minneapolis and St. Paul districts canceling class the past couple of weeks while teachers have switched to virtual learning.
ICE agents have been roaming our neighborhoods, circling our schools, following our buses, coming into our parking lots and taking our children, and our hearts are shattered.
And these stories, they just keep coming and coming, with federal agents, for example, raiding a home in St. Paul, letting a woman and her baby stay, but taking the other 6 people there, including a 12-year-old boy. Or with neighbors saying that they were told that it was about narcotics, not immigration, but they're skeptical because of the surveillance footage showing a package getting dropped off just minutes before the raid.
Federal agents inside were telling there's drugs in it, and if no one inside at the time claimed that package, that they were going to take everybody in the house.
And then when a family friend tried to pick up the little boy from a federal building the next day, he said that he was told that the kid had been sent to San Antonio, right? And something you may have noticed at this point is that a lot of these kids, they're ending up in Texas. That's not a coincidence. And it's something that more and more people have been speaking out on. For example, Senator Chris Murphy posting, "Last night in San Antonio, I met 2 traumatized young boys who were locked up for 6 weeks at Trump's baby prison in Texas," and saying they were taken when they checked in for a routine hearing, with their mom just waiting in the car with their backpacks for school, saying it's insane this is happening. And actually, on the topic of ICE detention facilities in Texas, we've got to talk about the update at the case of Geraldo Lunas Campos, a 55-year-old father of 4 who died in ICE custody this month. Because at first, ICE claimed that he was moved into solitary after he was being disruptive, and then they called medical staff over after they noticed him in distress. But last week, you had a witness telling the AP that he was handcuffed as at least 5 guards held him down, and one put an arm around his neck and squeezed until he was unconscious. And only then did DHS spokesperson Tricia McLaughlin, a notoriously fierce defender of Trump's immigration agenda, revise the initial story, claiming that Lunas Campos actually tried to take his own life and guards merely tried to help him, claiming that he violently resisted the guards and in the ensuing struggle he stopped breathing and lost consciousness. But now, we've got the autopsy report, and his death was ruled a homicide, with the cause being asphyxia due to neck and torso compression. And so then in response to it, McLaughlin issuing a statement saying that he was a, quote, criminal, illegal alien and convicted child sex predator. But all of that as his death was just one of at least 3 reported in little more than a month at this facility, which has also been described as really little more than a sprawling tent city. And then there's even more we're going to dive into in just a minute, but first let me thank a sponsor and say, if your New Year's resolution is stop living like a wet raccoon, I have the shoe for you. Because today's sponsor, Vessi, and their Stormburst sneakers, they're here to rescue your socks and your dignity. They're 100% waterproof, which means rain, slush, spills, and sidewalk betrayals no longer own you. And I wear them on coffee runs, chaotic errands, dog walks, and I forgot it was winter days and my socks stay dry every time. The traction's also top notch, so you're not ice skating to your car. And they've got a supportive heel, removable insoles, easy pull tabs, and a design that works with joggers, jeans, or real pants if you're feeling ambitious. Plus, they come in both high top and low top style, so you can go full ankle coverage or keep it clean and every day. They're also made with sustainable materials, which is just objectively a win. This is a true one pair solution shoe, not a closet ornament that you only trust on perfect weather days. And Vessi, They back them with a 1-year warranty and a 30-day hassle-free return, which is the opposite of buyer's remorse energy. So hey, if you want to actually enjoy winter instead of fighting it, head to Vessi.com/DeFranco or just scan that QR code and get 15% off your first pair. But then diving back into the news, Donald Trump's replacing the UN. Right? That's what you're seeing people shout right now as he's now launched his new so-called Board of Peace at the World Economic Forum in Davos, with several world leaders signing a charter describing an organization that really completely is unlike what was originally proposed, which was an already controversial temporary body meant to oversee the rebuilding of Gaza. In fact, it was actually the UN Security Council that adopted a resolution endorsing the establishment of the so-called Board of Peace. And it described the board as a transitional administration in Gaza with a 2-year mandate to start. But now the board's charter, it makes no direct reference to Gaza at all, instead describing itself as an international organization that seeks to promote stability, restore dependable and lawful governance, and secure enduring peace in areas affected or threatened by conflict. And in the signing ceremony today, where Trump claimed that the world is already richer, safer, and much more peaceful than it was just 1 year ago, he also claimed that the board would become one of the most consequential bodies ever created. And then adding that it will be the most prestigious board ever, it's going to get a lot of work done that the United Nations should have done, and saying,
once this board is completely formed, we can do pretty much whatever we want to do.
Now with that, I do want to note that he technically followed up by saying, we'll do it in conjunction with the United Nations, but that doesn't exactly inspire confidence, especially given how often and how strongly he's criticized the UN. And that's without mentioning that earlier this month, he moved to withdraw the United States from 66 international organizations described as contrary to the interests of the United States. And many of those were UN-related bodies dealing with issues like climate, labor, and migration. And on Tuesday, he straight up said that he thought that this Board of Peace might replace the UN. Although again, yes, it's Trump. He's often saying two things at the same time. He sort of walked it back saying, you got to let the UN continue because the potential is so great. But still, you're seeing people like an international law professor at Cambridge University saying this is a direct assault on the United Nations. This initiative is likely to be seen as a takeover of the world order by one individual in his own image. And they're right. This is being set up so that Trump just runs the show. Where both the UN resolution and the charter names Trump as chair, and the charter gives him the power to veto decisions, approve the agenda, invite members, dissolve the board entirely, and designate his own successor. And on the topic of succession, it's possible that Trump could hold the chair position for the rest of his life, even after leaving the presidency, or with a U.S. official saying the chairmanship can be held by President Trump until he resigns it. But adding a future U.S. president, however, may choose to appoint or designate the United States' representative to the board. Also, regarding who's on this board, while Trump has claimed that this is the greatest board ever assembled and everyone wants to be on it, the reality is that many countries, they're just not enthusiastic about it. Right? One, while Trump said that the board has the backing of 59 countries, only 19 countries were actually represented at the signing ceremony. And so far, it seems like 25 countries have publicly accepted, including Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Argentina, and Indonesia, just to name a few. But also two, very notably, no major European allies have made a commitment yet, and some have just outright rejected the idea, including French President Emmanuel Macron. A move that then led to Trump threatening France with a 200% tariff on wine from the country. Though with that, I'll say, some Europeans are on board, but it's also, so far, at least a certain kind of European. Right? Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has signed on. He's something of a Trump-style strongman himself, as well as President of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, who is also known as Europe's last dictator, and he's a close ally of Putin. And actually, on the note of Russia, they received an invitation, with Trump actually claiming yesterday that Putin had accepted, but Putin has clarified that he has not, and the Kremlin is still studying the proposal. And you're seeing the involvement of Belarus and possibly Russia being why you had Zelensky saying that he was unsure if Ukraine could accept the invitation. As far as Trump, he defended his decision to include them, and other countries considered to be autocratic, telling reporters, I have some controversial people on it, but these are people that get the job done. These are people that have tremendous influence. Trump yesterday even said sometimes you need a dictator. A very normal statement from the President of the United States, a position that is usually thought of as like the leader of the free world. So again, many of the world's most influential countries, at least so far, they're not taking part, including not only the biggest powers in Europe, but also countries like Brazil, China, India, and Japan. There's also been a lot of talk about the membership, because apparently that's flexible, right? Because the charter says that nations that accept the invitation will be given a 3-year membership term. But the permanent membership, that'll only be given to member states that contribute more than $1 billion in cash to the Board of Peace within the first year. But with that, you had U.S. officials claiming that technically membership does not carry any mandatory funding obligation. They're saying that if member states choose to contribute money, the Board of Peace will implement the highest financial controls and oversight mechanisms. With that, it's not clear if anyone's opting for the paid tier so far, though I will say Putin has floated the idea of paying it with Russian assets that are frozen in the United States. And so also it's still not entirely clear where the money is going to come from for rebuilding Gaza. Because even though Trump's so-called Board of Peace apparently has loftier ambitions, this is still seemingly its focus for now. And you actually had Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner laying out a $25 billion plan for doing so at the signing ceremony this morning. With Kushner saying the next 100 days will focus on increasing aid deliveries and rehabilitating essential infrastructure, including water, electricity, and sewage systems, and reconstructing hospitals and bakeries. But then he also presented what's been described as a master plan that would turn Gaza into a futuristic tech and industry hub with skyscrapers and coastal resorts. And Kushner is saying that the White House wants to bring free market economy principles to Gaza, reflecting the same mindset and same approach that he says that Trump's implementing in the States. But of course, while the people in charge here, they seem to see this as a big real estate opportunity, it's not clear that this is best for the people of Gaza. And the Palestinians, they seem to have little say. There's supposed to be a technocratic governing committee made up of Palestinians, but it's at the bottom of the hierarchy. And for now, the situation in Gaza, it remains extremely dire, and the violence, it hasn't totally subsided. Since the ceasefire began in October, you've had both sides accusing each other of violations. Israel saying Hamas has delayed returning a final body of a dead hostage, and Hamas saying that Israel has continued to restrict aid into Gaza despite an ongoing humanitarian disaster. Also, you've had Reuters investigating and finding that Israel's violated the ceasefire by moving the yellow line dividing Gaza deeper into the territory, destroying buildings and displacing Palestinians in the process. Also, that's as Israeli strikes have killed hundreds of Palestinians over the past few months, and in fact, just yesterday, Israeli forces reportedly killed at least 11 Palestinians in Gaza, including 2 13-year-old boys and 3 journalists. Ultimately, we're in this situation where you have people saying, a bunch of world leaders and real estate developers calling themselves the board of peace. It doesn't make it so. And the whole thing, it seems especially ironic given Trump's recent action in Venezuela and the threats to take over Greenland. Although yesterday you did have Trump threatening, but then also saying that he wouldn't use force in Greenland. And then he also dropped his threat to impose new tariffs on several European allies as he claimed that he and the head of NATO had formed the framework of a future deal with respect to Greenland and, in fact, the entire Arctic region. And then today you had Trump saying on Fox News that the deal essentially grants total access with no time limit. And then with that, you've had the New York Times reporting that there are at least 3 main proposals on the table. 1, a major new NATO mission in the Arctic. 2, restrictions on non-NATO countries, especially Russia and China, mining Greenland's rare earth minerals. And 3, an update to a 1951 pact between the United States and Denmark that basically already allows the American military to do whatever it wants in Greenland. But apparently the concern is that if Greenland gained independence, that it would threaten that access. So allegedly what's on the table is giving the United States sovereignty over pockets of Greenland's territory, basically meaning that these areas would be considered American territory. But, and that's a big BBL, but things are far from set in stone. And actually, you had Zelensky slamming European leaders today in his speech at Davos over their handling over the whole situation.
It seems like everyone is just waiting for America to cool down on this topic, hoping it will pass away. But what if will not? What then? Today, Europe relies only on the belief that if danger comes, NATO will act. But no one has really seen the alliance in action. If Putin decides to take Lithuania or strike Poland, who will respond? Europe needs to know how to defend itself. And if you send 30 or 40 soldiers to Greenland, what is that for? What message does it send?
Now, with all that, a very big thing is that he avoided criticizing Trump, and he actually kind of suggested that Europe should be more like Trump in terms of taking action, right? Raising the possibility that they could seize Russian oil tankers the way that Trump's done with Venezuela. And in fact, before that speech, you had Zelensky meeting with Trump, and it was a conversation that both leaders described as good without giving too much detail. But also, you did have Trump envoy Steve Witkoff, who's also deeply involved in the Gaza stuff, saying, I think we've got it down to one issue, and we have discussed iterations of that issue, and that means it's solvable. So with that, he's headed off to Moscow with Jared Kushner to meet Putin, and there are now supposed to be trilateral talks involving the United States, Ukraine, and Russia and the UAE on Friday and Saturday. But then, next up from that, we should jump back to the States because the federal investigation into Donald Trump developed proof beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump engaged in criminal activity. That is verbatim what former Special Prosecutor Jack Smith said under oath today before the House Judiciary Committee. And this hearing's a big deal because it marks Smith's first public appearance to defend his 2 attempts to criminally prosecute Trump for his alleged attempts to overturn the 2020 election and the handling of classified documents. And Smith, he's been under a gag order from a Trump-appointed judge that prevents him from discussing major elements of the documents case, which is why lawmakers largely avoided talking about the details of the probe. And so there were a lot of things discussed during the hours-long hearing, with testimony actually still happening while I'm finishing up recording. But one of the main overarching themes was whether Smith's investigations were politically motivated or whether he had hard evidence that Trump committed crimes. And so you had Republicans trying to paint the investigations as out-of-control political campaigns that were part of a broader effort to weaponize the DOJ against Trump ahead of the 2024 election, whereas you then had Democrats largely using the hearing to give Smith a public stage to defend his inquiries as legitimate and lay out Trump's alleged criminal actions in the cases that were shut down after he was reelected. And this is all very high stakes for Smith, right? Trump has made it very, very clear clear that he thinks Smith is one of his biggest political enemies, and Smith has said that he believes that the president is looking for any chance to investigate and prosecute him. Right in his opening statement, you had Smith delivering powerful remarks that quickly went viral, Smith fervently defending his investigations, claiming that he and his team followed DOJ policies and observed legal requirements, and argued that his actions were based entirely on facts and law, not political motivations.
President Trump was charged because the evidence established that he willfully broke the law, the very laws he took an oath to uphold. Rather than accept his defeat in the 2020 election, President Trump engaged in a criminal scheme to overturn the results and prevent the lawful transfer of power. After leaving office in January of 21, President Trump illegally kept classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago social club and repeatedly tried to obstruct justice to conceal his continued retention of those documents. As I testify before the committee today, I want to be clear. I stand by my decisions as special counsel, including the decision to bring charges against President Trump. Our investigation developed proof beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump engaged in criminal activity. If asked whether to prosecute a former president based on the same facts today, I would do so regardless of whether that president was a Democrat or a Republican. No one should be above the law in this country, and the law required that he be held to account, so that is what I did. To have done otherwise on the facts of these cases would have been to shirk my duties as a prosecutor and as a public servant.
And something you saw throughout the hearing were Republicans trying to control the narrative, making a wide range of sweeping allegations and implications, and at times using unproven, misleading, or just outright false allegations about Smith and the outcome of the 2020 election. Or with members also repeatedly peppering Smith with rapid-fire questions and then cutting him off when he attempted to respond. Whereas with the Democrats, you largely had them focusing on giving Smith that public platform to defend himself as an independent actor who was just doing his job and following the facts. And so you had multiple Democrats repeatedly asking Smith if he was pressured by Biden or anyone in his administration to launch the investigations into Trump in order to target a perceived political enemy or sway the 2024 election. And time again, you had Smith responding no, saying that he always acted independently and came to the decision to bring charges on his own accord based on the overwhelming evidence. And that was something you saw Smith reiterate during his notable exchange with Representative Ted Lieu.
Or anyone in the Biden White House ever direct you to seek retribution against anyone perceived to be Biden's political opponent?
No.
Did the Biden administration or President Biden or anyone in the White House ever write a social media post directing you to seek retribution against any particular individual?
No.
Did President Biden or anyone else in the Biden White House ever direct you to take any prosecutorial step whatsoever?
No.
With Lieu then going on to note that those are all things that Trump has done publicly, arguing that it's ironic that Republicans are trying to claim that Smith was at the center of a broad conspiracy to weaponize the DOJ to go after Biden's opponents when that is exactly what Trump is doing. A point that Trump himself only affirmed by going to Truth Social and posting during the hearing where he literally said he hopes Attorney General Pam Bondi is investigating Smith, who he also called a deranged animal. Also during the hearing, when asked about Trump's repeated threats against him, you had Smith giving this response.
The statements are meant to intimidate me. I will not be intimidated. I think these statements are also made as a warning to others what will happen if they stand up. And I am, as I say, I'm not going to be intimidated. We did our work pursuant to department policy. We followed the facts and we followed the law, and that process resulted in proof beyond a reasonable doubt that he committed serious crimes. I'm not going to pretend that didn't happen because he's threatening me.
But beyond that, we also saw Democrats spending a lot of time trying to prove that Trump knew that he lost the election and incited the insurrection because of it, which is notable because Smith would have had to prove that Trump had intent in order to secure a conviction against him if the case had gone to trial. And there you saw Smith repeatedly saying that his investigation found, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Trump knew his election fraud claims were false. He privately acknowledged so, but he still took illegal measures to overturn the election and then incited an insurrection when his attempts failed. And with that, you had Smith saying, based on his interpretation of the law, he believed that he had enough evidence to secure a conviction against Trump, and he repeated this line numerous times throughout the hearing.
Our investigation revealed that Donald Trump is the person who caused January 6th, that it was foreseeable to him, and that he sought to exploit the violence.
And also during a line of questioning about what would happen to American democracy if a president is not held accountable for trying to steal an election, Smith responded with a dire warning.
My belief is that if we do not hold the most powerful people in our society to the same standards of the rule of law, it can be catastrophic. I think if we don't hold people to account when they commit crimes, it sends a message that those crimes are okay, that our society accepts that. I believe that if we don't call people to account when they commit crimes in this context, it can endanger our election process, it can endanger election workers, and ultimately our democracy.
But of course, we're talking about this a year into Trump's second presidency, and that second presidency has also ended Smith's probe, and so it seems unlikely that he'll ever be held accountable for his attempts to overturn the election. But then also, one of the big questions getting thrown around with this hearing is, will Trump be able to pull something out of Smith's testimony that he can use to go after him? Because that's exactly what he tried to do with James Comey. I mean, he had a loyalist prosecutor charge the former FBI director with making false statements in a testimony that he gave to the Senate. And while many legal experts say that the charges against Comey and Trump's other enemies, they're bogus, the fact of the matter remains that you have the president itching for something that he can use against Smith. And so for now, whether there's really any basis for it or not, it really feels like more of a when he goes after Smith, not an if. And Jack Smith, he's not the only person that congressional Republicans are putting in the hot seat right now, because the House Oversight Committee just voted to recommend holding Bill and Hillary Clinton in contempt. And you actually had Democrats joining them in this effort, right? Because the Clintons, they refused to testify in the ongoing Jeffrey Epstein investigation, arguing that the subpoenas were invalid and legally unenforceable. Also, you had them noting that other officials have avoided testifying by submitting sworn statements, and since the Clintons provided similar statements, they think they should be excused as well, especially since they say they have no relevant information anyways. But members of the committee from both parties believe that the subpoenas were legal and that because Bill Clinton had ties to Epstein, they should testify. And so the vote to hold Bill in contempt was 34-8, with 9 Democrats joining Republicans, and while fewer cross-party lines for Hillary, they still went in favor with a vote of 28-15. And with that, you had Democratic Representative Stephen Lynch, who supported the Bill Clinton measure, telling Axios that there is plenty of evidence that he might have information given the amount of times that he had flown or traveled with Epstein, and since he knew Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, that said, as far as what happens next, right, the big thing is that this is just kind of the first step in what could be a very consequential proceeding for the Clintons, where the full House would have to vote in favor of this and then pass it over to the DOJ, but contempt charges could actually land them up to a year behind bars and a $100,000 fine. And while you had Republican Committee Chairman James Comer believing that he has the votes to move it forward, still you had some Democrats not supporting the effort, arguing that this is politically motivated. Or with, for example, Representative Robert Garcia saying that it's interesting that it's this subpoena only that Republicans and the chairman have been obsessed with putting all of their energy behind. And adding, Donald Trump is leading a White House cover-up right now of the Epstein files. And that is, you had Ro Khanna arguing that if anyone should be held in contempt, it's Attorney General Pam Bondi, because her department hasn't released the files in compliance with the law that was passed last year. Which, I'll say on that note, Donald Trump and his administration have done a really good job of distracting people, because we are now 1 month past the deadline set for Trump's DOJ to fully release the Epstein files, and we are nowhere near that actually happening, right? Nowhere near close to a full release. And so you had Khanna, who co-authored the bill, calling this an obstruction of justice. And while he and Representative Thomas Massie also took it to the courts to try to force the release along, a judge issued a ruling that's mostly an L for them, right? Denying their request to get an independent monitor to ensure that the DOJ complies with the law and releases the file, and the judge saying that he didn't have the authority to supervise the DOJ in this case. Though I will say the judge also said that Khanna and Massie raised legitimate concerns about whether DOJ is faithfully complying with federal law. And then with that, the judge said that they could file a separate lawsuit to request an independent monitor, and they could use other congressional tools to add oversight to the DOJ. And so you had Khanna saying they respect the judge's decision, and we will continue to use every legal option to ensure the files are released and the survivors see justice. So that's also not where this whole situation ends, because you have the House Oversight Committee actually deposing Ghislaine Maxwell next month. With that, I've got to warn you that right now it remains to be seen if this is actually going to be helpful. Or because Maxwell's attorney has already suggested she's keeping her mouth shut, saying this is not a negotiating position or a tactical choice, it is a legal necessity, and saying that this deposition is a waste of taxpayer dollars and political theater, and that, quote, the only certainty is a public spectacle in which a witness repeatedly invokes the Fifth Amendment. And as for any other details we know, it appears that the deposition will be held virtually, as Maxwell's currently in prison in Texas. But that, my friends, you beautiful bastards, is where your Thursday Philip DeFranco Show dive into the news is going to end. Thank you for watching, thank you for subscribing, thank you for sharing, and thank you just for being you. I love you, faces, and I'll see you right back here on Monday. Was that lame? Maybe. Whatever. I liked it.